What's the most awkward situation you've ever been in? I was looking at my mom's phone cause she wanted to show me some pictures from what she did that weekend. I swiped one too many times and came across one of her nudes. I felt my soul jolt out of my body seeing that My ex-wife later came out as a lesbian. And we divorced. Years later, I went to her wedding, where she married her now wife, which was one of my ex-girlfriends. I was in some business college class and the professor was talking about something related to how celebrities brand themselves. Someone in the class brought up Shaun White as someone who had great celebrity branding but isn't really talked about a lot. The professor was Indian and said he wasn't familiar with who that was. So my genius ass thought it would be perfect to say out loud I'm talking about Mountain Dew's baby. As a joke reference to that newscast where Shaun White said he had been drinking all night but was underage and the news person asked him what he meant, so he responded with I'm talking about Mountain Dew's baby. And we'll no one seemed to knew about that, or at least didn't think it was funny, as silence rang through the classroom and professor awkwardly moved on to a new topic. Truly the most awkward situation I've been in and also the worst haunting moment of my life. My 79-year-old mother-in-law with Alzheimer's telling us that she had had sex the previous night with another resident of her nursing home. She had been celibate for 20 years up until then, we think. My second year into university, I met a girl in astronomy class and soon hit it off with her. We became very close very quickly. Within a few months I was doing side jobs just helping out with the business she and her mother ran out of their home. Spending so many hours there, I soon became good friends with the mom as well. 2 years later, on her daughter's 22nd birthday, after everyone else left the party, she told her daughter and I to go sit on the couch and for her daughter to close her eyes. She walks back in with an unwrapped bed bondage set. The kind you strap to the corners of your bed and wraps around under it. And one of those little sticky bows you put on top of the present. She hands the bondage set to me, then puts the bow on my head before going ta-da. Both of us just sat there confused before she explained using that bondage gear on her daughter was her daughter's birthday present. She said she would be back in a few hours and to be clothed and have the house cleaned before she left. We sat there for what must have been a good 10 or 15 minutes before we said anything. Worst part was it was too small for the bed. So are you two dating? He said yes at the same time I said no. To which his friend told him I told you you didn't ask clearly enough. Last summer my wife and I were browsing for random crap in Pier 1. I'm wandering around the store aimlessly and see my wife kneeling down inspecting some merchandise on the bottom shelf. I approach her from behind, slightly tap the top of her head, and go boop. It was not my wife, just someone who looked almost exactly like her from the back. She looks up at me, all I managed to say was oh. I thought I was married to you. Sorry. My best friend waiting to tell her parents that she's gay until when I was over for dinner. When I was a kid, we were on holiday and decided to go to a church. While we were there I decided that I would be funny if I would slap my dad's ass with both hands. So I ran in full speed to maximize the impact of the slap. I ended up slapping a stranger who also happened to walk next to a woman with a stroller in his hands, which made me think it was my dad. It was even worse that my parents saw it as well. Edit, because people are asking what happened afterwards. My parents just laughed at me, which made the guy laugh as well, and then we just left the church, I think. This poor girl walked into my lecture by mistake about halfway through. This particular professor really enjoys talking to all of his students and was super engaging even with 400 plus students in his class. When the girl walked in, my professor stopped teaching, looked at the girl and asked if she was in the class. She said she was and began walking towards the front where the open seats were. This is a fairly large lecture hall and all 200 students, approx how many actually show up to class, were now forced to watch this poor girl walk towards a seat because the professor didn't continue talking and just stared at her. She got close to the front and I think the pressure of the whole room got to her and she said, "Actually no, I'm not," and turned around and we all had to watch this poor girl climb back up the stairs and out of the hall. I was literally watching my worst nightmare. One time in college, I snuck into Myra's room and hid under the blanket on his top bunk. My goal was to scare him when he came in and settled down a bit. He ended up coming in with his girlfriend and began making out with her. After a good, lifetime, couple moments, I jumped up and ran out. No saving it. When I was a kid, my family's van broke down, so we all had to squeeze into my dad's car to go to a funeral. Anyways, my older sister had to sit on my lap. Yep. You guessed it. I got a boner and she freaked out and started screaming. Was unexpectedly in the car ride with my boyfriend's parents on their way to sign their divorce papers. I was at a funeral for one of my husband's relatives. On my way in, an employee of the funeral home asked me when I was due. I wasn't pregnant, but I am fat and was wearing an Empire waistcoat, so I wasn't offended. As I signed the guest book, I corrected her and tried to defuse the situation with a joke about burning that coat later. But she just wouldn't stop. She kept trying to apologize and explain herself, and I just wanted to run away. Then I was stuck in a small room with her for the next 2 hours. Not awkward for me, but I was the reason for it. I served for a couple years and worked multiple restaurants in that time frame. I worked at a dentist. Night shift. Best and worst job for many reasons. Anyways, there was a regular that came in often. Drunk as a skunk and nasty as hell. He tipped really well but was so nasty to us girls. It never fazed me, so I served him often. He offered many times to pay for extra service and tried to get me to leave with him often. Of course I never did, but a couple months later I'm working a new place, little more high end. I work mornings here. And this was a Sunday morning church rush. Guess who was sat in my section? My nasty regular from my last job with his entire family. His wife. Kids. Parents. The whole group. Fresh out of church. The look on this man's face when I walked up and said hello. He was red as a fire truck. And I made it worse by asking if he remembered me. He left me a huge tip. Probably because I didn't bring up his nasty mouth and grabby hands from his late drunken nights. Edit: I was a waitress. That's what I meant by serving. I was a teenager with a boner. Pretty standard so far. I walked downstairs and had to tuck it in my pajamas so the head is sticking straight up and the erection is pinned against the body so the boner isn't noticeable. Well, when I put my t-shirt on, it fell behind the tip, so if you looked at my wassit line you could clearly see the tip of my penis. I was talking to my mom for a few minutes and she was flushed red in the face and quickly trying to kill conversation, not something my mom is known for. I walked away, saw what was going on and didn't know what the hell to do. We never discussed it, but because things were so awkward at dinner, I'm pretty sure my mom knew that I realized it happened as well. When I was a kid I hugged a random dude because I thought it was my dad. Even better how this dude's son was standing next to him. Okay, I already posted in this thread, but I remembered something even worse. When I was in 2nd grade, my brother and I would always be picked up after school by my dad. We had a green van with a red stripe on the side. So my brother grabs my hand and storms us up to the car. He rips open the door, sits us down, buckles me in, and then says, "Can we get McDonald's on the way home?" We both look up and there is 2 middle-aged adults sitting in the front seat that are obviously not our family. They stare at us. We stare at them. In my little brain we've been staring at each other for at least 10 minutes at this point. My brother unbuckles me. Unbuckles himself. We get out and walk away. No words were exchanged. We then checked who was in the car before getting in from that point forward. I was riding in the passenger seat with my mom, who has always been strict and very tight-knit several years ago, when for some reason she decided to completely open up to me about all of her drug experimentation and sexual exploits in the 60s. And the time she did cocaine with Steve Jobs at a fancy restaurant in the 80s. It was a very uncomfortable eye-opener and I was trapped listening to it. My family's not super religious, but when I was about 13, they decided to go to synagogue on Purim for some reason. Part of Purim involves reading from the book of Esther, which has a part about Esther coming to see the king while he's sitting on his throne in the throne room, and when he sees her, he stands up and extends the golden scepter. When the rabbi got to that part, my 13-year-old brain pictured Esther coming to see the king while he's sitting on the shtar and burst out laughing. No one else laughed. Instead, Everyone turned to stare at me and I had to explain myself to an entire room of people. We now celebrate Purim in the comfort of my parents' home. I walked in on my roommate in senior year of college banging his girlfriend. We had a rule about a hat on the door if we wanted privacy. There was no hat when I came back one morning and I got a full eye level side view of him and her mid-thrust because he had the top bunk. They kind of laughed it off but was pretty awkward for me. I used to run a restaurant and had inherited an employee with a slew of mental health issues. She had massive anxiety issues and just couldn't handle the pressure of working in a restaurant. She'd break down and cry over simple mistakes if she felt she was making too many. It was extremely unfortunate. But I was terribly underprepared to coach someone like that. One day, during downtime, the cooks were shooting the shit and recounting stories of weird ex-co-workers. I opened up my yap and said, who was the one who kept crying every time they'd screw up? She was 2 feet away and literally responded with me.